The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. After Jesus had washed the feet of the disciples, he returned to the table with them. And he said, "Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen. But it is to fulfill the scripture, the one who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I tell you this now before it occurs, so that when it does occur, you may believe that I am he. Very truly I tell you, whoever receives one whom I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord. The context of today's Gospel is the Last Supper, Holy Thursday, and Jesus does something very remarkable. He is a rabbi, and his disciples are there, his pupils. He takes that towel, wraps it around his waist, and washes their feet. In that time, and even today, it would be unthinkable for a rabbi to do such a thing to his students. Better the students wash the feet of the rabbi. But Jesus is trying to teach these disciple would-be bishops a lesson that would be key to converting the Roman Empire. And that is, if they're going to lead, they must serve, and serve sacrificially, like Christ. So the fact that Christ got up from the table, took off his outer garment, which is symbolic of what he would do on the cross, which is give up his body. And he puts that towel around his waist to serve the very ones he knows will, the next day, betray him. So here he is serving his enemies. And they would never forget that, because once they encountered the risen Lord, and especially after Pentecost, they knew what they had to do. Go into a Roman Empire that was their enemy, persecuting them, martyring them, and still love them, and serve the poorest of the poor, because when Jesus washed their feet, the feet, especially in that day, would be very, very dirty. And so they knew that their task in the Roman Empire would be to serve those people, the poorest of the poor, and especially in their brokenness and their messiness, and serve with great love. And the fact that they did that converted the Roman Empire. Through generation after generation, we have examples of saints who did that, and that's why we still have the church today. And we're called to do the same, to serve with great love, even though they may not be the ones that we prefer to serve. But we know when we serve our enemy, or even anyone, we're serving Christ, because Christ is in the poorest of the poor. That's the lesson from John chapter 13. When we go to the first reading from Acts chapter 13, we see another type of service. Here, St. Paul has been given an opportunity to speak in the synagogue, in a Jewish setting, and he doesn't waste the opportunity. He gets up and very neatly summarizes the Old Testament in terms of salvation and how it applies to Christ, who he's trying to preach. So, on the spur of the moment, he's able to get up and to bring the highlights of the Old Testament, including the escape from Egypt, the trek through the desert, the promised land obtained, and then the judges. They were granted a king, Saul, David, all pointing to Christ, the climax of all of that. They were able to proclaim the kerygma, that very short but very powerful summary of the faith. And again, that's what we're called to do, to have that in our hearts. Paul went on to give his testimony of how he met Christ on the road to Damascus. And we're called to do that as well. If someone asks us why we come to church, why we're Catholic, what does Christ mean to us, we should be able to say, here's what Christ means to me, and here's what he's done in my life. That's what Paul did. And that's what most of the saints did as well. So finally we come to Psalm 89. There's another way to serve the Lord. The psalmist says, I will sing of your steadfast love, O Lord, forever. With my mouth I will proclaim your faithfulness to all generations. I declare that your steadfast love is established forever. So singing, proclaiming, declaring, all in a sense serving God in praise and worship, which brings the community together. It's a great set of readings today as we continue our journey through this time of Easter, the resurrection of Christ, heading to the great feast of Pentecost. Let us ask the Lord for that extra grace we need to be true, loving servants, ready to do what is necessary in terms of bringing Christ to our friends and even those who may be our enemies.